All right, here we are at Standup. And it's interesting. The order is exactly the same as it was, except that now Luke is in between Michelle and Kate.
Do you want to do Kate first, since Kate usually has?
Caroline is first. So,
I think I just reviewed Adriana's, and I'm reviewing Trevor's, and I found an SME for Adriana's interview. So I think that's my stand-up.
Exciting. Michelle did bring up a good point, though, which is Kate always has to leave. So let's move Kate to.
I actually don't today.
Oh.
You don't have to leave?
No, our meeting's at 1:30 today.
Okay.
Never mind then. I take
you
it
can
back.
still go next.
You
Kate.
can still go though.
Yeah,
I don't have anything. I don't have anything anyway.
Okay, I guess we already covered that.
I think I spent longer saying that I didn't have to leave than my actual report.
Right.
So.
Well, then you swap places with Michelle, which makes Luke up next.
Okay, well, I do have to leave at 1, so that's perfect. Okay, so I've just been working on the name change form, trying to incorporate some of the changes we went over when we met with a bunch of people, and then also working with Michelle on the 209A motion to modify. And I think there's one thing that we could talk about. So I think I might need Michelle to help me explain this a little bit, but we were going through to do the language review to see, like, for translation, to see if everything would be ready / able to be translated, right, Michelle? That was where this problem came up.
So this is not a language review. This is a reviewing the code to see what's translatable or not. And
yes.
And like the methodology there for what we're doing right now, I think is a little bit messy, but I'm not sure what it is that we do want. So, oh wait, is that what you were going to ask? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to, because we have an issue where it's discussed translation of conditional language with group end. So
if we want, if we want, we can go into it now. It might be better to bring it up like Teaching Tuesday when we can display some code and stuff. I don't know. It depends how much standing up other people have to do, I think.
Yeah, we can put it on the back burner and maybe do it another week, because I do have to leave at 1, so I won't be around.
Yes, since Luke has to leave at 1, and I think everyone else here had a chance, we did have some kind of stand-up-y stuff during the management meeting. I feel like this is a good time for us to talk about it. So,
sure. Do you want to pull that up, Luke, or do you want me to take credit for the mess I've created?
Whatever you want. Should we just talk about it? Should I show the actual code?
I think showing the code is
showing is good.
Most useful.
Okay, let me just first I'll show the issue, because the issue has the the code it went. I'll just play. Oh no. Okay. To make sure.
So I can just I can just share my screen because I've got the code.
Yeah, if you have it already, it's gonna take me a minute.
So
yeah, that sounds good.
Sure. Not sure exactly how this is going to do. No, you can't. Okay, hang on. Stop share. Let's try that again with the cursor in the right place. That's very interesting to learn about Chrome. Very cool. So so we've got sentences like, I understand that even if I modify or terminate, which we want to change we want to do an actual language review where we change it to like change or like whatever makes sense for it. But if I, modify, if order type equals modify, else terminate, right? So right now we have it in templates because we want this to be reused in various places. So we're saying, the template for modify and the template for terminate. We called them translated to thinking of like making it more obvious to translators that these are to be translated. On the other hand, this would be a little shorter if it just said, modify if order equals modify else terminate, right? but that would mean that when we did a language edit, we would have to change it everywhere. So, and it also means that this would look more like, I assume, and certainly it would be great to talk with some translators, but that they would have to edit in here. So it kind of blurs the line between, do you edit in code or do you edit in places that don't look like code, right? Because if now you're editing in something that looks like code, how many things do you edit? Do you edit modify here as well? Like, I don't want that to happen.
So Michelle, I think that what I'm saying right away here is that you do not, when you do the template here, I think you don't want to translate modify or terminate. I think you want the whole sentence. That's what you want
And
translated.
that's what our style. Yeah, that was the.
That's
Because
the
it's
style
really difficult for because
Yeah.
if you just
I
plug in
see, got
translate
it,
or
got it.
modify or terminate, you're not going
we
to
could
get
just do a up here a Mako if,
yeah.
and then if
Yeah.
order type equals modify.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
understand that if
Yeah.
I modify.
Yeah.
Okay, that will mean each individual place, like it's
Sure.
not going to be
That's
That's
okay.
right.
abstractable.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's
They,
okay.
they have
if
they have
that's
translation
better.
memory systems too. And then the other thing is, if it's a whole sentence that you want to reuse, template for a whole sentence is fine. It's just like a sentence fragment. You can't do
Yeah,
that.
I think we don't want to reuse the whole sentence.
Well,
I think,
you said
I think-
something like motion to modify or motion to terminate. Like that would be a fine whole idea you could have as a template if you wanted to do that.
that's good to know, but I don't think there is something like that right now.
Okay. It's always just the
And
word
you might
modify.
also, I think, Quentin, what you're saying is also motion to modify or motion to terminate. Those are, so that's like it's a proper noun for a particular motion.
Yeah.
And it's a noun. So one thing that you really can't do is give people verbs in isolation to translate. They really need, the translators
Okay.
really need a full
Yeah,
sentence.
yeah.
if it's
That
gonna
is
have
a
verb
great
in it.
insight. And also apparently I'm seeing something that I wrote down and then forgot. So that's good. I like that option. That sounds great.
And then the last thing to say is like, you know, the it's great to think about reusability, but
Yeah,
I would say,
reusability
like,
can definitely
this
go
would be a
too
place where
far.
it might hamper, even if we were only staying in English, it might hamper the ability to understand what's going on there. So I
For
would say
sure.
like this would be the kind of reusability. We might not try to save those couple of seconds of programmer time because it'll make it harder to come back to and understand what's going on
For
later.
sure. Sounds good.
Not to derail, but I'm not sure how exactly does the translation system work for DocAssemble? Is it like the translators are given like entire sub questions and like question texts to translate, and can you still embed the like our normal Python words within that and those get translated as well?
Yeah, it's block of text by block of text. So like a sub question, you get the whole sub question in, and it's a side-by-side translation format in an Excel spreadsheet. So they'll see the English text with highlighted terms. So all the Mako and Markdown will be highlighted. So they'll, like I'm just doing this right now for a really big file. And, you know, the translator, I told him like, just ignore the words that are colored with either blue or green. Those are the two colors it happens to use.
I see. And I guess if they're also translating the like whatever would come out of that Mako, then it'll generally work okay.
Yeah, and they have the ability to mess stuff up when they do the translation. So because it is the actual Mako and there's Python in there. So if they happen to go in and change something in the colored text, it can break our code.
Yeah.
Or sometimes the coloring doesn't work perfectly and they.
Yep. Yeah, there's limits to how much you can pre-do. So this still requires explanation and testing and cleanup.
Are you going to, did you talk to Jonathan about the exporting as XLIF files?
He added that feature. I haven't experimented with it yet to see, because our translator is like, okay, we can use the Excel spreadsheet. So
Oh, good.
That's nice. So part of that is to say, if you set a variable to, you know, order type equals modify, and then you use order type everywhere as a variable, that is never going to be able to be translated. Like if you use order type in the logic and also as a word, in your
Mhm.
text that will never be able to be translated because you can't change it to modify, you can't change modify it to something else without breaking logic, right? So it'll always be stuck as modify, which is why you don't want to use variables and in for both functionalities.
I think you might be missing a step there. I'm assuming you're talking about like the choices. Like if you had some choice where people had a text that was set to a certain value and you're depending on the value. Is that what you mean?
No, I mean that in this code, I mean, sure.
Otherwise, I think there might be a missing step there that you have to explain for us.
So with order type before, it was a choice. What is order type? It was the variable value of the choice, right? There was a choice, order type, object, right? Not an object, a radio, and so the value was either modify or terminate the words, right?
So when you didn't have the two options, because you can have a choice, and you have the one on the left is what the user sees, and the one on the right is the value.
So they had both.
Who
And the one on the right was modify, right? It said, I want to modify, modify. I want to terminate, terminate, right?
Right.
And that was order type. So the value of order type was modify. And they were using order type in all those places to either fill in modify or terminate appropriately. But it was also used in logic to check if something or other in order to do another action. So that is not translatable.
Yep. No,
So
you're
I'm
right.
not.
Yeah.
I'm-
Keep code for
I'm-
code and keep words you
Yeah.
want to appear in the display for separate from anything that's used for logic. I think that's your point.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, essentially, like, yeah, the only experience I
That's
have
what I
with
said.
this
Yes.
is the only experience I have with this is Qt, which does have like a really strict, like, it's like a Q string, which is just like a different string type than like the normal like C++ stuff. And so anytime you have like a Q string, you generally are supposed to assume like it's a user facing string and you should not be doing logic on it because it can be translated at any time.
Yep, exactly.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
a
I
great
was mostly just curious to see if like DocAssemble had similar things, but I guess I don't know if it's probably not strict about it, but we are
It's not
handling it
strict
in a
about
similar
it.
way. Okay, as long as we're handling it in a similar way, I think it's probably good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there might be ways for us to like use some kind of code hygiene to make it better and easier to follow. But it's like a rule we have that people have to follow essentially right now. There is something called there. Just because, sorry, I know we're we're veering off of the stand-up format quite a bit, but
That's
there
okay.
is
It's just part of Teaching Tuesday.
there's a cool object called DA context, which might solve some of these problems that I have not used. So we'll have to see. Maybe it's worth extending or looking at the pattern of it and see if it is helpful. I'll put it on the chat.
Awesome. Sorry. All right. So that was step one of Luke's stand-up.
Is there more?
What
Step
more
two.
do you have? All
Yeah,
right.
I think that's the only thing that was like to
Sure.
bring up.
All right.
Oh, well, then
So,
it is Michelle then. So if it's a good segue.
I assumed everyone else had their day in the sun. No, I didn't know. All right. So a similar issue has come up with interesting testing stuff. Testing for languages. Maybe I brought this up last time. I don't remember. And the translatability, how choices get translated when they don't have a variable attached. So I think we should document somewhere that everything needs a variable, a label and a variable separately. They can't just have a label that is a variable or
Yeah.
a value rather.
Which is confusing because in a checkbox, it's actually a key, not a value, which is, okay. Anyway, that's, yeah. But never a variable.
I can never keep track
mean,
of what docassemble is because it keeps switching them around in different contexts. So, yep, key, not a value. But it is a value of, never mind, it doesn't matter. So that is something. So I think the testing framework is ready if it's not being used with translation with languages, and if it's being used with languages, that's something we're still developing. Worked with Tanner, worked with Aubrey. with Luke on the motion to modify. Everyone's making great progress, I think. Tanner has a nice challenge in front of him for the last week of school or whatever it is.
Oh,
So that's exciting.
maybe it's not MVP. I hope it's not MVP.
Oh, okay.
We'll see.
That's not my place to get into, but
Nope, it's not.
so, and trying to think. I think other stuff I'll bring up at other times. I mean, the deep dive on Monday has been really helpful in discussing our architecture and how to, and Lily's been really helpful there. I wish she were here right now, but in kind of modeling and making some specific decisions about what we want where. And I think the discussion about kind of like where to write those questions for inclusivity, I think if they're in the core of the assembly line, I don't know, I'm thinking, I have the image in my head of the diagram we were making, but and some other core questions there. But yeah, I think that's it.
That does make me think, because it goes back to, because you were explicitly referencing back to Caroline's, but like we should re-finesse our refocus on things like the style guide, because that's a thing, that's a document that we can produce, that we can share with people, that can be useful. And
I've already shared some of the principles from it with a different group.
Yeah, but I think that would be, I think that could be, I think we should, while we have time to think about things, we should think about remembering that we want to work on those, because that's all very useful stuff. Because it is, yeah, it's one thing to like produce, like generally my focus is like, let's just produce good stuff. But you produce good stuff, and if no one knows about it or can access it, then you might as well not have done it. So
yeah.
But yes, that's just me agreeing with various other people on this call.
Well,
all right.
Think about some of the ways we got that style guide too, which is getting structured feedback. Actually, Luke, your dad, was the person who got us a lot of that structured feedback that went into the style guide then. And it might address some of the other things. So I wonder if there's a ways for us to get some, to think about how to get some user testing and expert feedback, both of those on some of our new match of forms.
I think, I mean, I have thoughts I want to discuss sometime about our users, thinking of our developer users and how we want to create things for them, which I think will affect some of the choices we make about architecture, data structure, that kind of thing, like our choices structurally in interviews. But I think that's something I want to think about a little bit more before bringing up more deeply here.
I like that idea of thinking about, I mean, we always should be thinking about our audiences. So, yeah.
DocAssemble has that, the reading, does it have a reading, grade level reading evaluation thing? Yeah, built in. So I'm thinking in terms of the style guide, there are certain principles that we might, I don't know what, I mean, Jonathan did that, right? Or that's not the thing you did, Quentin. That you did the,
How did that,
yeah, so partly I'm wondering if, I mean, because the problem with the style, I still think we ought to do it, and it's important. But I also know that a really good style guide, part of it is how you present it so people can read it. And you want it to be comprehensive. At the same time, you don't want it to be 15 pages of stuff people have to slog through and have checklists. So what I'm wondering is if there are ways that we could incorporate some of the style guide principles into the readability. I mean, the plain language, I'm thinking about the plain language style guide. And I don't know whether you can do it in terms of other parts of the DocAssemble, but things, so I'm saying, we know that we don't want any punctuation at the end of questions in a screen, except for question marks, right? Is that something that we could add to the readability checker? And I'm just, there are various there and there no italics, I mean, various really straightforward, simple things that we know across the board we don't want. Then the piece to make it more complex is to flag it and say to the user, in general, we don't do this. Do you have a good reason for doing it? So allow them to go ahead and do it if they just, exceptions, but at least bringing to the awareness. And that way, people aren't having to read this huge document to double check, some basic things. Oh, like contraction, there's a list of things. They're just so easy to go through.
Actions, parentheticals.
Yeah, all that stuff.
We
And
could
so we
try
could
to
just-
make a wizard to read interviews. I mean, it's,
Yeah,
again, parsing, or I mean, we could alternatively try and make something. No, never mind. We can make something to read their interview and look for things like italics and.
We should also not be
I think
someone else might have already done something like this, right?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
might
Oh,
look
yeah?
for open source tools that we could incorporate.
Oh,
yeah. Well, that's why I was
People have
thinking
done
the
it. That's
readability,
great.
Jonathan's readability thing, because that already exists, whether we could improve on that. But I don't know. And like you say, it may, I mean, a lot of this stuff does already exist.
But yeah, it strikes me that something like that, and then this also makes me start to think about accessibility. So
I do want to push back a little bit on just, you may not have meant these words, so this may not be like useful, but
Yep.
when you said we don't want a checklist people are going down in the guide, I actually totally disagree. I feel like we do want a checklist that people can be like, that has details lower down, but it's a checklist and you can go, okay, I've covered this, I've covered this, I've covered this. If I just
The
have a
checklist-
document I have to read.
Michelle, the
and I have to
checklist wasn't the
internalize
issue.
it.
The issue was that
Okay.
the checklist was going to be 200 pages long. That was my thing, is that it shouldn't be so long that people can't face it. I believe in
Okay.
a checklist. I just don't think that
Perfect.
anybody's going to
Okay.
do it if it's too long.
Yeah,
all right, I love it when we all agree.
yeah.
I'm adding this issue. I think it's a great one. And yeah, I mean, it's easy to, it's a YAML file. So we're not parsing anything. We're just going to read the YAML and take out the sub question part if we find that as a key in the question.
We do parse the markdown to see if it's italics, correct? But if someone already has something that does this, then that's fine.
Yeah, and then we have to figure out, like, how does Jonathan turn the that representation of it into plain text? Because if you notice, if you click source, it says something like, this is the
That's
plain
true.
text version of the question. We might be able just to borrow that snippet of code that he already has, if
That's
it's not
awesome.
tightly coupled to the rest of DocAssemble. And I think the key thing would be, like, this produces a report at the end where you can see all your questions instead of having to click screen by screen to see the things where you might have problems.
And then as you get very fancy, then you could be like, oh well, there are we notice you have 500 questions on a screen. That's too many. We know that I mean, but I do really care.
That's like an easy one. Like, just counting the number of fields.
But I do really, Caroline, I really love the insight that it prevents people from having to read a voluminous document that they're never going to read anyway. I still like the idea of creating a document because it makes us think about the things.
I did preface it saying I'm not trying to get out of it, but also, you want to be able to have what you create useful. And I've done style guides, and like, nobody has time to read the whole style guide.
Yeah, no, this is a really great deliverable. I think this would
Maybe
be
we can split the style guide once we have the thing. We can split the style guide into, like, this is the stuff that is checked for, so that people can read, like, this is the stuff I as a human need to check for, versus, like, if I don't have this program on DocAssemble to check for me, this is also stuff I would look out for.
Yeah. Well, we can do the spin-off linter for it, and then
Sure. All right, later, Luke.
Later, Luke. But yeah, great idea. All right, Quentin, it's I'm assuming, Michelle, you're done.
I think so.
Yeah. Quentin.
Tuesday, I think. I don't have anything to report. Oh, I guess I'll say one thing, which Michelle reminded me, which is a concrete thing we talked about this week at our coding meeting. Makes me think we do want to say, okay, we're closing the chapter on MA Virtual Courts. We're not going to rename it. We're going to have a new repository that replaces it, that has the same things with no Massachusetts specific code. And then we'll have our new repository with the Massachusetts specific code. That'll free up a lot of our resources. I mean, we'll mean losing the history of the old one, but I think it will.
We could also just fork and divorce it from the upstream, just like we did with the other stuff, and then we'll keep the history.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I've done that like 5 times, so I know that's an option. But I don't know that if it's a totally different thing, that we'll need to copy the history into the new repository in this scenario. But maybe. But we're going to do things like reorganizing all of the files, and I don't know if it'll end up being helpful for us to have the change log there.
Okay.
Before we move into
So
Teaching
we'll
Tuesday,
fortunately get rid of all the history.
yes,
Maybe
it's
fortunately.
positive.
Yeah, it might just be kind of messy if we're like, oh, this change we copied from this file, right? That's all I mean. Might be better to have a clean start. Generally, like, I'm wary of clean start, but
Well, it's not really a clean start because we have all the files, but yeah.
right.
And is your weakness that once someone's reputation's lost, it's hard to regain? I can't remember that quote.
Trust
Caroline
is
got it
hard
though.
to-
I was close
trust
enough
is
that
easy to
Caroline got
lose
it.
and,
All right. I once started a paper off with a variation on the opening line of Pride and Prejudice, and someone was like, "That reads awkward." And I'm like, "Not a Jane Austen fan, huh?" But anyhow, okay. I feel like I just talked over Quentin in making that joke.
Oh, it's okay.
But I wanted to make sure Bryce had something before we moved into Teaching Tuesday.
Yeah, I can make it quick. It's I've mostly just been mostly since Friday, I have just been diving into the XML schema stuff and the actual ECF, like electronic filing definition, and what Tyler is expecting and stuff like that. And I've mostly been diving into that. I'm moving a bit back to doing Python code, and I think I will also this week we'll try and start on the civil docketing form for the appeals court, which, even though from my understanding you always send it in with another, like 2 of the other forms, we're just going to have it as a separate form for the moment and maybe eventually figure out how to couple them before it gets released. I'm not sure. But I'll at least start trying to get the PDF up and get a card up in Trello and everything for that. No blockers. So.
And we talked about execution order, which was a fun conversation.
Oh yes, yeah. Michelle and I talked about execution order for
Finally happened
after the deep dive yesterday, which was very useful. So.
Awesome.
Cool. Quentin.
You're saying turning it over to me for Teaching Tuesday?
Yeah, I'll cut.
Do we
and-
want to